Good morning. Welcome to everyone in person and also online. We are going to start with a scripture reading. Last week we started a series in Ecclesiastes, so we are going to read from Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, and we're going to read verses 4 to 18, so basically the chapter of chapter 1. So Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, starting in verse 4. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough seeing, nor the ear has its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, there is something new? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom, and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. So the book of Ecclesiastes, very cheerful. One thing I did back in 2016, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, is this big long bike ride called the Tour Divide. So I rode my bike this is a bicycle, mountain bike, from Banff in Canada down to the border of Mexico, following the Rocky Mountains, the Continental Divide. It was a big trip that I had kind of on my bucket list. It was 4,400 kilometers, took me about 20 days to finish, and it was just a really big goal. So it took, a couple of years to even plan for it, to try to figure out what's the best way to train, what do I bring, how do I set my bike up, all the different checkpoints along the way, where can I get food. It's considered a self-supported race, so I didn't have any external help from anybody. So whenever I needed food to get from one place to another, I had to stock up at certain places, so I didn't know where those places are and kind of organize all this and plan all this. So it was a big thing. It was a big goal. It took a long time to plan for, a long time to kind of prepare for and accomplish and actually finish. And one thing that was very interesting is once I was done, once I accomplished that goal and I was finished, I actually felt a little bit depressed. And I heard this is actually a common thing with people that complete the Tour Divide, and I think it actually carries over to other goals as well, is that once you put in all this time, all this effort, you're focusing all of your energies on accomplishing a big goal, such as the Tour Divide, once you're done, it's kind of a letdown, because you're like, okay, what else can I do now? Like, I'm finished, it's done. And you kind of have this feeling of depression as kind of saying, like, now what? What next? What do I do now? And it's a pretty common thing. I started looking up this a little bit just to see if this is a common thing amongst different goals, and it is. I remember back to an engineer friend of mine who set up his own business, and that was his goal. He went to university, he's got his engineering degree, he worked for a few years at a certain company, and then set up his company, and that was what his goal was. So all of these years he's working towards this goal, and once he achieved it, he's like, okay, now what do I do? Like, you kind of have this almost a letdown, almost a bit of a depression because of it. And it applies to many things. Maybe you get the job you've always dreamed of, or you set the company up that you've always wanted to. You finish a big goal, like maybe a sports goal like mine with the Tour Divide. Maybe you have a certain salary in mind that you want to achieve, and you think, once I make this amount of money, I'm going to be set and I'm going to achieve this goal. And maybe you get to it, so then now what? You have this kind of letdown afterwards. And it comes down to the idea of us being a goal-oriented society. That's what we're taught in a lot of aspects of life. Set a goal, achieve the goal, and you're going to be a success. You're going to be a winner. And that's something that we are taught, but we find that we can be disappointed when we don't feel as amazing as what we think we should once we achieve our goal. We think about, what are we going to do after this? So it's kind of an interesting thing to consider, this idea of achieving goals and actually being a little bit let down because you don't feel as good as what you think you should feel after you get it. So you might start thinking to yourself, there's more to life than simply obtaining goals. What is there beyond this whole idea of just setting a goal and obtaining the goal? And Ecclesiastes is a book that is going to teach us a little bit about this. It teaches us about the nature of life, what we should be living for, that life goes through cycles, and we need to have a greater meaning than simply obtaining earthly-based goals. Again, for me, it was the Tour Divide, and there's other things that it can apply to. But there needs to be something greater than that for us to have that meaning of life, that fulfillment in life. So that's what we're going to look at today. Last week we looked at, we had our introductory lesson, kind of setting up the book. We identified the author as Solomon. It's not explicitly stated, but the evidence points to Solomon being the author. He's referred to in this book, depending on your version, as the preacher or the teacher as you look through. Refers to himself as the son of David, king in Jerusalem, somebody who's attained great wisdom and wealth and many different things. So that evidence points to Solomon being the author of the book. The theme of the book is that all is vanity or all is meaningless. Again, in your version, you're either going to see the word meaningless. I have the NIV, I guess the old NIV. There's a new one out now. But my version says meaningless. Other versions will say vanity. And everything is vanity or meaningless that is under the sun. And when they say under the sun, that's from an earthly perspective. So in other words, everything is meaningless without God in your life. Everything is meaningless when you're simply focused on these earthly things. So the questions raised in the book is, what profit is there for a man for all of his labor under the sun? What do we gain for all this work that we do while we're on this earth? What benefit can we gain from all of our efforts in this life? That's the question that this book answers. So in the first two chapters, which is what we're going to get into today, Solomon demonstrates how he came to this conclusion that he's going to come to. He's going to look at the observations regarding the cyclical nature of life and its apparent meaninglessness, its vanity, and he's going to draw from his own experiences as he searches for meaning in these different places. And that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to look at the first chapter and see the fact that the world continues on regardless of what we do in a sense. And in that respect, it is meaningless. It is all vanity chasing after these things. He describes the cyclical nature of life and the earth that we live on. And then he describes the futility in the search for your earthly wisdom. And that's the first point that he kind of searches out in this first chapter. So let's look at Ecclesiastes 1. We'll look at verses 4 to 7 again. We're going to see him describing the nature of the world and the cycles of life. And again, it's a very interesting thing that this book was written so long ago, and because it was inspired by the Holy Spirit, it's something that really teaches such a thing that is very relatable and very understandable to everybody, including the people like us today. Ecclesiastes 4, verses 4 to 7, or Ecclesiastes 1, 4 to 7. It says, generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south, then turns to the north, round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All the streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. So the cycles of the universe and of the earth continue through time. Even as generations of people, of mankind, come and go, these things still happen. He describes how the sun is constant with respect to its rising and setting. The planets are still moving around the sun as they always have, and they will continue. The winds continue their whirling cycle. The water cycle also continues. I like how it's described in this passage, talking about the rivers running into the seas, then through evaporation and rain, they return back to the rivers again. We have that water cycle working in the earth as it does. So looking at nature, it seems like nothing ever changes. It just goes on in circles and remains the same. And again, regardless of what we do in our generations as mankind, time marches on. The cycles continue on. Things keep happening on the earth as they do. He continues on in verse 8 of Ecclesiastes 1. It says, all things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. So here we have this idea of nothing seems to satisfy. And this gets back to my example of the tour divide and of these other big goals that we set for ourselves. Without God in our life, nothing seems to satisfy. We can achieve these goals and we can get there. We can obtain these things. And we still feel empty inside. We've obtained these goals, but then now what? We have to just pick another goal. This satisfaction that we think we have is just fleeting. It's there and it's apparent, but it's fleeting. It goes away. And given time, we desire something else. We have to achieve another goal. And we can work toward our goals and still feel unsatisfied. And here he has this idea of all things are wearisome, more than one can say. Again, he continues on in verses 9 to 11. He introduces in this passage, nothing is new under the sun. And this, again, is kind of an interesting thought that he describes in this passage. Ecclesiastes 1, starting in verse 9. See, he says, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. So, interesting idea about what will be done has been done before. If thought to be new, it's only because it's been forgotten, because it was already done before. You might ask, what about our modern technological advances? They probably didn't have smartphones, 6,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, that sort of thing. And it's true. There's going to be new inventions. There's going to be new things that come along. But in general terms, things are invented and things are forgotten. There's lots of technology that's around. If somebody's younger now, they might not know how to operate a rotary phone, something that you put your finger in and kind of move it around to actually dial somebody. Or about understanding when the phone rings, you can't check who it is before you actually answer it. What a world of chaos to live in, just to pick up the phone and be surprised by who's on the other end. These things that are invented are soon forgotten. You look back to the ancient technology, how the pyramids were built, Stonehenge, these mysteries that are in the earth that we see, these things were created with methods that are still debated today. We're still not totally sure how they put these things together so well, and they were constructed so perfectly. They were created with technology invented at the time, but then after time, that technology was forgotten. These things come and these things go. We can understand from this passage that we as mankind do learn over time, but we do also forget a lot of things over time as well. Things that are done in the past, those mistakes probably will be repeated in the future. Things that were invented in the past will probably be forgotten and invented again in the future. These things go through in a cyclical nature. These inventions, this knowledge that we gain as people is forgotten and is created again, essentially, in the future, is invented again. It's a very interesting passage to describe the nature of the earth, the cyclical nature of the earth, and about the people that live on the earth as well. And faced with what appears to be such meaningless cycles, the preacher, or Solomon, the author, determines or is searching to determine man's true purpose. So he stated the cyclical nature of the earth. We live in a world that continues regardless of what we do as people, in a sense. We can work toward our goals and still feel unsatisfied as people. And whatever we obtain in our goals as humans, we'll tend to forget, and the cycle starts all over again as the generations come and go. So then he gets into his own experience in searching for knowledge and searching for wisdom. This is the first thing that he really looks for to see, is this what the meaning of life is all about? So we'll continue on and look at verses 12 to 15. In this passage, the preacher here, or the teacher, introduces his search about looking for what life is all about. So Ecclesiastes 1, verses 12 to 15. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore wisdom, all that is done under the heavens, or explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. So he was king over Israel, and we saw last week how Solomon was granted a wisdom by God. Through prayer, he asked for this wisdom so he could guide the people of Jerusalem in the best way possible, and God granted him that. He granted him this wisdom, this God-given wisdom. And he determined to use this wisdom given to him by God to seek and search all that has been done under the heaven. If you look at verse 13, I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. So it would seem natural for him, since he was given this God-given gift of wisdom, to search for wisdom, search for knowledge, try to examine everything that's there on this earth, everything that's done under the heavens. So he's searching for this earthly knowledge. He's looking for this earthly wisdom. And he summarizes what he found after seeing all the works done under the sun. And he concludes that all of these things are vanity and grasping for the wind. There's little one can do to make significant changes on this earth. He's saying how what is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. He looks and he goes to the cycles of life, and we can make changes on this earth in our society, but the mistakes we may correct today will be forgotten tomorrow, only to be made again. So again, what is crooked cannot be straightened. He searched for this wisdom. He tried to look for these earthly things on this earth and tried to make that the source of meaning in life. And he found that, again, it's meaningless. It's something that's not worth doing. If you look at verses 16 to 17. Verses 16 to 17. It says, I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is chasing after the wind. He acknowledges here the greatness and wisdom that he attained. Again, he had that God-given gift of wisdom. So he started searching all of these earthly things that gave him knowledge. And he looked for these things, and the wisdom that he's looking for are those things that are like earthly wisdom. We have philosophy, science, things of this world. That's what he's searching out. And if we look at verses 17 and 18, we can see what he concludes from this. After he's searching for these things, he'd increased in wisdom more than anyone before him. He applied himself to the understanding of wisdom, also madness and folly. We're going to get into that a little bit next week. But in verses 17 and 18, we can see what he determines. It says, Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. So he's searching for knowledge and learning of earthly things. When I look in, I've gone to university for quite a few years, and I can see that this is the life goal for many people. This idea of searching for knowledge, searching for understanding, the whole idea of academics. I know a lot of professional students. I'm not sure if I'd be considered one of those. I've been going to university for a long time. But it's a life goal for many people to seek out this knowledge. And that's their driving force in life. They want to expand their mind. They want to expand their understanding of the things of this world. And Solomon did the same thing. And he perceived that such wisdom was grasping for the wind. It was meaningless. It didn't provide the answer to his problem. What's the meaning of life? He looks for wisdom, looks for this earthly search for the things of this earth. And he discovered that such wisdom and knowledge provides grief and sorrow. You might have heard the phrase, ignorance is bliss. And I think there's actually a lot of truth in that. If you don't know anything about anything, you're not going to be stressed out about anything because you don't know anything. So the whole idea of the more you learn, the more you become burdened about what you understand and what you know. You might look at the environment today and you start learning all about the environment and how us as people, since we're growing so much on this earth, maybe we're damaging it a lot, and you start getting stressed out about it because you're learning more and more about that stuff. So the more you learn about certain things, the more you can be stressed out. It'll just bring you grief and sorrow. Another thing that you can understand is that the search for knowledge is truly endless. Even this earthly knowledge that we're looking into. I've said this phrase before many times, so you may have heard it, if you're listening maybe. The more you know you don't know. And I've seen that in, again, my pursuit when I'm going to school and learning things. You start learning about a certain subject, if it's physics or science or biology or chemistry or whatever it happens to be. if you have a rudimentary knowledge of what things are going on, you might think, okay, I understand what chemistry is all about. But then when you actually start learning it and learning about these specific things inside those fields of study, you'll start to understand that there's a whole world of stuff to learn and understand about those different fields of study. So the more you know, the more you start to understand that you don't know. You start understanding that you might have thought you had a handle on something before, when in fact you don't. You start understanding that there's so much more to learn about a certain subject. And again, that can start stressing you out. If that's your pursuit of life, is the search for earthly wisdom, the search for earthly knowledge, you'll start to understand that it is futile, it is meaningless to learn all of that stuff. And without God in your life, it is like chasing after the wind. You go to James chapter 1. I found it kind of interesting preparing for these lessons, since it's an Old Testament book. Most of my sermons, it's all New Testament verses, and I might have like one Old Testament verse. And this one's, it's opposite, it's different, it's backwards. Everything's Old Testament in one New Testament verse. So James 1 and verse 5. We do have a wisdom that we have a responsibility to search for. This is something that we do have to do as people. We have to understand that the wisdom that is being taught or talked about in Ecclesiastes is the search for earthly knowledge. And he's saying that search for earthly knowledge, if that's your driving force and the meaning of your life, that is futile. That's what he's referring to in that passage. We do have a responsibility to seek truth with respect to godly wisdom. You go to James chapter 1 and verse 5. It says, "But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him." We need to seek the truth that God provides. We're going to see in Ecclesiastes, as we study through it, that's what the writer, the teacher, the preacher does determine in Ecclesiastes as well. Seek God. Seek understanding what God's all about. And that should be what the meaning life is, and that is what the meaning life is. We have this responsibility to search for this God-given wisdom. And when we search for this, God will provide it to us. He is going to bless us with that knowledge. He's going to give us the knowledge about righteousness, which is truly what matters in this life. If you go to Proverbs chapter 2, we're going to look at verses 1 to 11. And I really like this passage because this search for godly wisdom is going to bless us in this life. It's going to bless us in this life, and it's also going to bless us in the life following as well. I like how Rick referred to that, is that it is a constant in life. We can rely on the wisdom that God is going to provide to us, because it is going to last forever and it's not going to change. This earthly wisdom that we might search for is going to change. If you're studying philosophy or certain areas of study, and that is the meaning of your life, is searching for this knowledge, it's going to change over time, because we as people do change. We have different understandings of things. God-given wisdom does not change, and it's going to bless us and anchor us in this life and kind of give us that root, that anchor that we need in this life to have a blessed life. Proverbs 2, verses 1 to 11. "My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guide you, or will guard you." With this godly wisdom, we can live through this life and its cycles and have a meaning that extends beyond this physical world. When we are simply searching and focusing only on that search for earthly wisdom, we are going to have a life that's chasing after the wind, or meaningless, or vanity. We have to understand that we have to be anchored in that search for godly wisdom. And I think the good news to this is that we can do both. I think that search for earthly wisdom isn't necessarily a bad thing. Learning things is a good thing. The thing that is being taught in Ecclesiastes is that when that's your only source, that's where your only thing you're searching for, that's when it becomes futile. Is when your only thing that you're living for is that search for wisdom, that search for that earthly wisdom, it becomes futile. So we can have both of these things. We can search for godly wisdom. If we understand that that is the thing that we should be living for, that is the thing that we should be trying to understand, is this wisdom that's provided to us by God. We can include that search for earthly wisdom as well and learn the things that are in our physical world. We just have to make sure that we are anchored in that search for knowledge that comes from God. So the teacher in the first chapter starts with an observation of the meaningless cycles in life. And it leads him to the search for man's true purpose. He states that cyclical nature of life on this earth. We live in a world that continues on regardless of what we do. The sun rises, the sun sets. Things happen on this physical world, based on, or regardless of the choices that we make in a certain context. And we can work toward our goals, and we can actually still feel unsatisfied. Whatever we do when we obtain our goals as humans, we will forget, and the cycle is going to start all over again. That's what's being described of the setting that we're in. And then the teacher, naturally begins with his search for earthly wisdom in his search for meaning. He set his heart to know wisdom, but he found that search for that earthly wisdom is grasping for the wind. This wisdom is something that we can search for, but we have to understand that we have to search for that godly wisdom as well. That should be what our driving force of life is. And in our next study, we're going to continue on with the teacher's search for meaning. He's going to again look in different areas of life. He looked for that search for earthly wisdom to give him meaning in life. So he's going to move on to other things, things that aren't super moral in certain ways. And we're going to see that. But we have to understand that we have to have that search for godly wisdom in our lives. That can really put us down that right path and anchor us to the true things that will give us that true meaning of life. So I'd like to offer an invitation. One piece of knowledge and wisdom that hopefully everybody can understand and accept is that sacrifice that God made in giving us his son to die on the cross for us. If you're not sure how to accept this gift that he's offered to all mankind, we can show you in the scriptures how to do that. And if you are a Christian who's struggling in any way, again, please make your needs known, and we'll help in any way that we can.